The question of the historicity of Jesus Christ is a question that's still being asked today, although it is not as prominent anymore, given the fact the majority of scholarship agrees that Jesus did in fact exist. However, you do still have some of your mythicists who argue that Jesus never existed, it was merely a figment of imagination or a tale written in books. However, many of these arguments sometimes stem from the objection to resurrection and miracles. While this video is not going to be dealing with the supernatural elements of Christ, this will be dealing with the question of whether or not Jesus was an actual person that existed in the time period that the Bible proclaims. Last week we looked at the works of Flavius Josephus, who wrote the Antiquities of the Jews, and how he recorded not only that Christ existed, but also that there was the Christian movement, and that the brother of Jesus known as James was killed for the very fact that he followed Jesus. Our next author we'll be looking at today is Cornelius Tacitus, who is known as the greatest Roman historian, who lived from 55 to 120 AD. His two most prominent works on Rome are the Annals and the Histories. Our focus will be on the Annals, which covers AD 14 to 68. The Annals are believed to be written sometime in the early 2nd century, around 15 to 17 AD. We'll be focusing on Book 15, Chapter 44, as highlighted. It reads, consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christ, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then upon their information an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skin of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt, to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. We see in this writing that Tacitus records what Nero was doing to Christians at this time. However, not only the very fact of what happened to Christians, but where their name originates from, which is from Christ, who was under Pontius Pilate and Tiberius. As Gary Habermas points out, there are several things that we can find that points to some important information regarding this text. First off, Christians were named from their founder, Christ. Secondly, he was put to death by the Roman procurator, Pontius Pilate. Thirdly, during the reign of Emperor Tiberius, which is around 14 to 37 AD. Fourthly, his death ended the superstition for a short time, but it broke out again, especially in Judea, where the teaching had its origin. His followers carried his doctrine to Rome, when the Great Fire destroyed a large part of the city during the reign of Nero. The emperor placed the blame on the Christians who lived in Rome. Tacitus reports that this group was hated for their abominations. These Christians were arrested after pleading guilty, and many were convicted for hatred for mankind. They were mocked and then tortured, including being nailed to crosses or burnt to death. Because of these actions, the people had compassion on the Christians. Tacitus therefore concluded that such punishments were not for the public good, but were simply to glut one man's cruelty. Again, while this does not affirm the resurrection of Jesus, this does point to the fact that Jesus was an actual person who died on a cross and suffered under Pontius Pilate in the reign of Tiberius. Now, the question will become, did Tacitus write this as a forgery? Meaning, did someone use his name and it wasn't actually written by Tacitus because of the very fact that Jesus is called Christ in the document? Or the question will become, did Tacitus have a bias in this document because he calls Jesus Christ? What we find in history is actually the very fact that oftentimes the name Jesus and Christ in regards to the Jesus of Nazareth would be used simultaneously or synonymously. The idea that Jesus would be referred to as Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus Christ, or also just referring to him as Christ, almost like a proper name, even though it was more of a title for him. The other reason we could believe this is not a forgery, and this is a genuine copy of Tacitus' writings, is the very fact that we know that Tacitus hated Christians. He was not in favor of their movement, and so him writing anything in support of them would be odd, especially given the fact that he was objecting to their claims and who they were as people. What we also have to find is that many historians will argue that the writings here are still seamless and there is no signs of any editing that was taking place in the documents. However, this could be shown to be different later down in history if we find more documents, but based on what we have so far, there's no reason to believe that we do not have a genuine copy of what Tacitus believed and wrote regarding the history of the Jews and the Roman Empire.